Trucking companies will tell you anything just to put a truck driver in an empty seat. So, how can you tell what's the difference between a lie and the truth? Well, on this channel, after 10 years as a truck driver, I create educational videos for new truck drivers, people thinking about becoming a truck driver, as well as owner operators. So, please consider subscribing. In this video, I'm going to help you understand what's the difference between what trucking companies tell you versus what to expect, a few of the right questions to ask these trucking companies, as well as what are the best trucking companies for you. And this is going to be directed towards the new truck driver. Now, if this video in particular is not for you, then please consider going through my playlists or my library as I create content on all things trucking. Now, obviously, there's a huge list that we could go through about this topic. So I tried narrowing it down to about 4 topics. So that way, the video is not hours long. So today we're going to go over pay, miles, home time, as well as location. And in my opinion, the last one actually kind of brings everything together, and it really is by far the most important. Now, I understand if the most important thing to you right now is new truck driver pay. Hey, I get it. So I'm going to lead with that one, but it's all going to come through, and meld together nicely at the end when we talk about location. So please stick around for the entirety of the video. Now, I am going to recommend that you go ahead and pause the video, go grab a pen and some paper or a pencil, whatever. Take notes on your phone, but I'm going to cover a lot of information in this video. I'm going to pack it as full as I can, as well as trying to respect your time. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, forgive me if I keep looking down at my notes, but like I said, I want to be respectful of your time. Now, starting off with new truck driver pay, there's a couple things that I need to, talk about just really briefly, really quickly, so that way you can better understand truck driver pay, because the different types of trucking, the different trailers, as well as truckload versus less than truckload, are all going to make a difference in this pay. So the types of trucking, and this is going to be very generic, okay? There's going to be drive-in, and that is just the typical 53-foot box that you see going down the road. That's the majority of the freight. So that's where most of the jobs are going to be, especially for entry level. Another type of trucking is going to be refrigerated trucking. That is a box, but it has a huge refrigerator unit on the front. And the majority of those loads most likely will be less than truckload. It's just the way that it is. Some of them are full truckload, but a lot of times those are going to be less than truckload. And then you have open platform, and that's going to be your flatbed, your step deck, anything that you can literally see the freight on the deck. It's open deck. But less than truckload as well as truckload, the difference between this is where it really starts to, you really have to take a look at what that company specializes in. Truckload is basically you load up that trailer in its entirety and you deliver it to one customer. Sometimes it might be 2 drops, but it's usually never more than 2. It's oftentimes just 1. That's a full truckload being delivered to a customer. Less than truckload means just that. It's multiple stops. So each customer gets just a portion of what's on your trailer. And the reason these are important is because truckload, you're going to need to be focused on the mileage. Okay. When you're talking to the recruiters, ask, what's the majority of your freight? Is it truckload? Is it less than truckload? That's a pretty simple, straightforward question, and they should be able to answer that very easily. The less than truckload, you're going to have what's called accessorial pay. And there's all kinds of accessorial pay, but for this video, we're just going to be talking about kind of one in particular, and that's going to be stop pay. Every time you go to a customer, on a drop, whether it's 4 drops, 8 drops, which that should be roughly the range of most of the LTL loads, every time you stop, you're going to get stop pay. The stop pay, you can't really look at, what you're getting paid per mile as much, or at least put as much weight into it, because you have multiple stops, which takes up it takes up a lot of your time. It takes time to go through the guard check, to get checked in, to wait in line, to bump the dock, to get unloaded, for them to break down the pallets. You get the idea. You can be at each receiver for multiple hours. So it's important, how much you're getting paid for that stop pay. And, on these LTL loads, regional mostly, some of them are actually OTR, but, or over the road, but regional and local, that stop pay becomes much more heavily weighted, and it should play a larger part in the consideration for who you're going to be driving for. When you're looking at the CPM versus percentage pay, CPM is cost per mile, percentage pay is what the total load pays, as well as hourly. Those are the three different ways that you can get paid in the trucking industry. Now, the percentage pay, I'm going to kind of throw this one out of this video because it's very rare that you're going to be on that percentage pay as a new truck driver. Is it out of the question? No. You can check out some of my owner operator videos to see how that works. But in this video, I'm going to be focused mainly on the cent per mile or pay per mile, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to touch on a little bit of the hourly because that more pertains to the local truck drivers. When you're asking these recruiters, what is your pay? What is your top pay? You need to consider whether or not you're going to be over the road, you're going to be gone for long periods of time, or if you're going to try to get through the house more. If you're going to try to get through the house more, like, maybe more of a regional type position, then you may want to look more towards that less than truckload because it's much easier to get you home because the regional routes, obviously they're much shorter. So you're going to be within the range of the terminal, usually somewhere in about the 500 to 600 mile radius. I would consider that a long, less than truckload route, especially one way. But it's going to keep you a lot closer to home. So obviously you can get home much, much easier. As far as over the road is concerned, well, you're going to be gone for long periods of time. So if that's one of your considerations, that's definitely something you need to be asking for. What do they mostly run, LTL or truckload? And then look at what they're paying per mile and try to figure out, what's the best suited for you. Now, the trucker pay is pretty straightforward, so there's not really a whole lot to go into as far as what to ask the recruiters and what to figure out. But, figure out what do they run mostly truckload or LTL? What do they pay per mile? And if there's some LTL freight in there, ask them, what is the stop pay? What are accessorial pays? Figure out those, all of those things, and then you can compare with the different companies and truly see who pays more. Okay. Now, when you're talking to these recruiters, something that, you need to understand, their number one objective is to get a seat into, an empty truck. That's it. Now, I know the big question that you all want to know is, what should I average per week? And you can't put a definite on that because different trucking companies pay differently. Location matters. You're going to see a pattern here with that. Where you live matters. What freight, where are you? If you're in Chicago, you're in the hub of America, and that's where most of the freight comes from. But if you're in Montana, obviously it's going to be much different what you can make or average on a weekly basis than like Chicago. So I'm hesitant to put a number out there. I will answer the question, but keep in mind, this is going to range, and it's going to range wildly. With those ranges, I'm going to give you a range of what you should expect to make. And that's going to be somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per week. Now, it's an average of your weeks. You may have weeks where, 1 week you're going to make $1,000, and then the next week you're going to make $2,600. Okay, there's obviously a huge range, but if you look at it, you add that up and you're making $1,800 a week. That's really good. But a lot of times truck drivers can't get past that very first week where they only made $1,000. They can't see the forest for the trees, and so to speak. And immediately they want to quit, or they call up their dispatcher, griping away like, why am I only getting $1,000 a week? Well, oftentimes the reason is the truck driver, but sometimes it's the company. But it's an average, and it's going to change wildly. And something else to keep in mind is that average is a full week of working. So if you work 7 days one week, you should expect to fall within your range. If you only work 4 the next week, well then, do the math. It's 4/7 of what you made the week before. And understand, if the wheels aren't turning, you're not earning. Now, for most of us that we're going to be looking at OTR or over the road new truck driver positions, the next point on my list is going to be new truck driver miles. Okay. The mileage, whenever you're talking to the recruiters, ask them, what are your truck drivers average per week? I'd bet that 80% of the time they're going to tell you, our truck drivers are averaging 3,000 plus miles a week. Okay. Sorry about that. My camera, for some reason, just decided to stop recording. If they're telling you 3,000 miles, that's going to be a bit of a red flag. Now, it's not a red flag enough to just stop the conversation, but you should be questioning that and understand that they're trying to fill a seat. Or the proper response to that is, okay, that's great. Like, I'm glad your experienced drivers are going to be able to get 3,000 miles per week. Now, as a new truck driver, I understand that I'm going to be learning and I'm not going to be as efficient as an experienced truck driver. So what are your newer truck drivers averaging? That question is really going to throw them for a loop. Now, they're probably going to come back with like, they're doing 2,500 to 3,000. Once again, not realistic. Just understand that's probably what's coming. As a new truck driver, right out of the gate, you should be able to average somewhere between like 1,800 and 2,200 miles at the start. And like I said, all the reasons before, you're figuring this out. You're figuring out how to get down the road, how to set up, your lunchtime, where to park, what truck stops are good, what truck stops are bad, where parking is bad. There's so much to learn. Okay. And those first few weeks that you're doing it, you're not going to be as efficient as a seasoned pro. So it's going to take you longer to do things, but it's a fast learning curve. You will figure this out quickly. I promise you, it's very simple. I know I'm giving you a lot of information. I appreciate it. If you're enjoying it so far, please, click that thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the notification bell so you know when more videos like this are coming out. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below, or if you just want to say hi, cool, what's up? But anyway, back into the video, 1,800 to 2,200 miles a week, that should be kind of your target. And then your target for the following week should just be to try to go a little bit further than you did the week before, and so on and so forth. Now, you're not going to average 3,000 miles a week. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've been doing this. Can you get out there and just run your truck into the ground and run your health into the ground and get 3,000 plus miles a week? Yes. Do I consider that being a healthy truck driver? No, not really. Are there weeks that are going to require you to run more than 3,000 miles? Yeah, sometimes. I've put down 3,700 miles in a week before. I didn't do that all the time. I'm not Mr. Super Trucker. I averaged, probably somewhere around 2,500 to 2,600. And that's pretty solid considering that I ran open deck, I ran flatbed and step deck. So understand that it's going to take you some time to work into that. And if these recruiters are telling you higher numbers and you're not hitting that right out of the gate, don't get discouraged. Don't think, well, that recruiter's lying to me. But don't beat yourself up if you're not doing that at first, and understand that they didn't lie to you. You didn't ask the right questions, as well as you're just not a seasoned pro yet, so you're not getting down the road. When you've asked them, what do they typically run? Do they run truckload or do they run LTL? Well, a truckload company that runs that east and west, they're going to have higher mileages on average than, an LTL guy. Now, if you contact a company and they're an LTL company and they're telling you that they average 3,000 miles a week, that's probably BS. So now hopefully you can understand the difference and maybe make a better decision kind of based on mileage. But ultimately, this is one of the important things. I know it's super important for you, and I think it's super important for just kind of your mental health overall. And that's going to be new truck driver home time. Now, home time this one is one that you definitely want to figure out because I think that having the right amount of home time is going to really, it's going to make you successful or more successful overall in the long run. And understanding how the home time works and how to best utilize the company or pick the right company that's going to give you the right home time, I think that's going to help people go further in their truck driving careers rather than getting out there. Well, the recruiter promised me one thing. I haven't been home in 8 weeks. This sucks. I quit. Okay. Understand that the majority of the companies are going to say, as new truck drivers, that for every 1 week you're out, for every 7 days that you work, you're going to earn 1 day off. That's not enough. Not enough for me. And I don't recommend that for, to anyone that's out here starting. Now, going back, if you are young, you have very few bills and you have very few ties that are keeping you at home or needs or reasons to want to be home, well then sure, you can take that position, you can run with it, you can make as much money as you possibly can, save as much money as you possibly can, and further your trucking career faster. But for the majority of us that are looking at this, that have kids, that have husbands and wives and have responsibilities at home, they need to have that home time. Well, whenever they tell you that they only have 1 day off for every 7 days, that's not going to be the right fit for you. And just as a general rule, the larger the company, probably the closer you're going to find to that 1 week out, 1 day off type mentality. Okay. Those larger, what we call mega carriers that are multiple thousands of trucks, you're just a number to them. They don't care about your home time. They care about their bottom line. And if that truck's not moving, that truck is no longer an asset to them. It is a liability and it is costing them money. They don't want a truck driver that's going to go home all of the time. So if you're looking for more home time than usual, a mega carrier may not be the way to go for you. Now that's kind of catch-22 because as a new truck driver, it's difficult to get on with other companies that aren't mega carriers. It's certainly not impossible and it happens all the time. And I highly recommend, that you look at that. But if that model fits for you, great. Expect it and expect them to not give you 1 extra hour of that, that 24 hours that you earned off. You may get 34 hours off, which is what's called a reset in the trucking industry, but that's all you're going to get. Let's see. Now, what I recommend you try to find, this worked for me. This may not work for you, but it was a nice balance for me. And I didn't always stick to this. Sometimes I worked 7 weeks straight. But what I kind of recommend would be a 3 week on and a 1 week off. And whether that's 5 days or whether that's 7 days, I think more realistically, you probably get about 5 days. I think that that's a nice, healthy balance. Those regional type positions, you're going to be looking at working, at least try to work 5 days on and 2 days off. And every once in a while, you may only get 1 day off. Understand that the trucking industry varies every single week. Everything is ever changing. There's a lot of factors that are out of your control. Accidents and weather and things of that nature. They're going to slow you down. They're going to tie you up. Things are going to happen. Breakdowns are going to happen. You may not be able to get home on a certain day that you request. So if something is super important to you and you're an over-the-road truck driver, request it early. You explain the importance of being home on that date to your dispatcher fully. Don't just say, hey, Joe, I need to be home on the 17th. Don't say it like that. Express how important it is for you to be home on the 17th, and most likely they'll get you home on the 16th. At least aim for it. But moving on to local truck drivers. Now, local truck drivers, you're actually going to get pretty much the least home time out of everyone. And I know that sounds crazy because you're going to be sleeping in your bed every night, but you are going to be working the most. You're going to be doing the most. The most driving happens, or the most working, I should say, are from local truck drivers, believe it or not. You have extended hours because you're not going over a certain radius. And trust me, the trucking companies know all about all the legalities of everything. You're going to be working the most, and oftentimes you're only going to have one day off. Okay. Now, there are going to be schedules where you're going to get 2 days off, or they're going to tell you that you're going to get 2 days off. And that may happen. I'm sure there's guys out there that work local, and that's all they work. 5 on, 2 off. That's it. But the majority of companies, you're going to be working 6 because you might be scheduled for 5, but people call off, trucks break down, hot loads pop up, things happen. And I would say more often than not, you're probably going to be working 6 days out of the week because they don't have to pay you overtime. Some companies do, some don't. So if you're looking at local companies, that's a good one to ask as well. But now that you kind of understand the home time and have a rough idea of how it works, the smaller the company, the more easy it's probably likely for you to get home. Something else to keep in mind. This is going to kind of tie into location, but that's where we're headed with this anyway. You need to look at freight lanes. Okay, freight lanes, what that is just like it sounds. One trucking company, one of their major freight lanes might be from the Midwest to the South. And I know that that's pretty general, but that's what you're looking at. A lot of your Midwest companies are going to have Midwestern freight. So some of their lanes, they'll tell you, are just in the Midwest. They have a lot of regional runs. They have some local runs. And that's kind of how it works in general. As a trucking company starts and grows, the majority of their customers, like their direct customers, are going to be around their home terminal. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you're looking at a company, or let's say 2 different companies, and home time is important to you, but their home terminal is 50 miles from you, and the other company has a secondary terminal that's also 50 miles from you, you might want to lean towards the company that their home terminal is right there. Is this always the case? No. And customers are always changing because different companies will, offer crazy rates to try to take over a contract. Happens all the time in trucking. But in general, the home terminal is going to be where a lot of freight is going to be located. So if you can find a company around you that their home terminal is within a short driving distance of where you're at, then that's a great idea to look at them heavily and figure out if maybe, that's where you want to go work. Here's another example. Let's say you live in like Western Minnesota, and your geography is going to get really good as you become a truck driver. I promise you, or at least your American geography, but contiguous, you get it. Anyway, you live in Western Minnesota and you're looking at Midwestern companies. Obviously, that'd be kind of a natural thing. When you call up this company and you start asking them about their freight lanes, their number one thing they're going to tell you is we have a lot of freight in the Midwest. Of course they do. Midwest, Chicago area, that's like the freight hub of the United States. That's where the majority of freight's at. There's all kinds of good freight there, and it usually pays very well. And so it's easy to get around the Midwest. Now, where you want to move beyond that, say, great, that's the short range freight lane. Okay. Now you want to ask, what are your longer freight lanes? And if they kind of scratch their head and say, well, do you run out of the Midwest over to West Coast? Do you run Northeast? Do you run to the South? Kind of give me a general idea of where your longer freight runs. Because if you live in that Western Minnesota area, but the majority of their longer freight lanes are over to the Northeast or down South, well, it's going to be harder for you to get home and actually partake in your home time. But let's say they do run out west, or let's say, we have a bunch of customers over in the Dakotas. We run through there all the time. You're going to be able to pass through the house. That's going to give you maybe an extra night's sleep whenever you're looking at over the road running. Work smarter, not harder, or I guess ask the right questions. Now, don't be alarmed if a recruiter is like, I need to, or I don't know, or we kind of run all over the United States. I would prompt that person, or prompt you to ask that person, well, look, if you don't mind, can you look more into this and figure out where the majority of your freight runs, whether it be Northeast, Southern, or West Coast, if you're looking at the Midwest, and get back to me with that answer, because that should be play a large factor in the decision of what trucking company you want to hire onto, if home time is one of your most important things. Now, like all of that sounds like location, and it is. Now, the location of terminals to where you live is going to be the most important deciding factor, at least in my opinion. Unless you're that young guy or young gal that doesn't have any ties to home, then I would say just go with the company that you can make the absolute most money from. That's where you should go. But if all these other factors are important to you as well, most importantly, kind of home time, then you need to look at locations of what's around you. And if there's a company that their terminal is like 20 miles from you, but there's a different company that's like 300 miles away from you and they pay a little bit better, it might be a better choice to go with the company that's closest to you rather than this one that's farther away, because it pays more, because ultimately it's going to be harder for you to get home from that company that's further away than the one that's right next door in your backyard. Looking at the best places to live or the best trucking companies to work for, if you live in the larger areas, like if you live in the Chicago area, the Houston, Dallas area, or Southern California or Seattle area, obviously you're not going to have any issue getting home and having home time as long as they have the right freight lanes for you. But there's going to be a lot of freight in that area. So, it might be a little bit less of a consideration as far as getting to the house. But if you live in like 3 hours west of Kansas City, it may be more of a consideration for you to go with a company that's a little bit more local instead of one that's much larger, maybe even pays better, but is based out of Kansas City, because it's going to be harder to get you to the house. Now, I'm speaking in very, very general terms here, so don't hold my feet to the fire because there are exceptions to every single rule. But just as a general statement or general practice, please, take that in consideration. That's a big one when, you're looking at the location of the best trucking company to go with. Now, something to ask the recruiters would be, where are the majority of your direct customers? And if their response to you is that, oh, we run load boards, well, you may have a bit harder time getting through the house just running, generic load boards. Now, if you live in, like Chicago and they're running, generic load boards, it's not going to be an issue for you to get home. But if you can ask them, well, where are the majority of your direct customers based? And they tell you, your area, they're based around our home terminal, that's going to be a good spot that it's going to be able to get you through the house. And they probably pay a little bit better, because direct customers are almost always pay better in contract than being what's called a third party contract from something else, which would be like running off of the load board. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Ask, where are the majority of their direct customers? Now, they may not want to give you any names, and that's actually understandable. Undercutting in the trucking industry is horrible, so keep that in mind. But ask them, where are the majority of their direct customers? And if he can't answer that question for you, I wouldn't, not necessarily demand an answer, but I would keep asking him, look, this is very important to me. I need to at least have an understanding of where the majority of your direct customers are. And, if you can't tell me that, maybe this isn't the right company for me. And he'll come up with an answer, or she'll come up with an answer. I guarantee it. The last point that I want to touch on, and this is based around that location, is pay per mile is not the end all be all. It's not. I promise you it's not. if you look at everything that I just lined out for you, which I know is a lot of information, and if you took the notes, hey, I'm proud of you. Sit down, go through them, and maybe make them a little bit more organized than whatever came out between between these ears, and look at what, break down what are the most important things that are to you. And if pay is the most important thing to you, hey, I get it, I understand. But do me a favor and try and set that aside and look at all the other things that we covered in this video and see what is most important to you, whether it's getting a lot of miles, getting that experience, so that way you can maybe move up and move into a better company, a better position, make more money, aim towards being an owner operator, whatever your end goal is. Try to figure out, how can I do those things? What's my long-term goal for this? And pick a company that best suits all of the other needs. I promise you, the pay per mile or the rate or the trucker pay or whatever whatever term you've deemed for it is going to fall in place. And the reason it's going to fall in place is because you're going to be able to get the miles, you're going to be able to get the home time, and overall, you're going to be much, much happier as a truck driver. Truck driving has a huge turnover rate, and it's because this process is not talked about enough. So if you know anyone that's considering being a new truck driver, please point them in the direction of this video, or even just YouTube in general. That way they can start getting an idea of what the trucking industry is like, and what are the most suitable trucking companies for new truck drivers. Because if you just go at it alone and you kind of dive into the trucking industry without any kind of knowledge prior to, you're going to have a lot of issues. But if you've made it this far into the video, that's not you. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe or ring that notification bell so you know when the next video is coming out. But as always, stay driven.